Headline News, I'm Chuck Roberts. On this New Year's Day, the world's two most powerful people vow to work together to make the decade ahead both peaceful and prosperous. President Bush followed up on a tradition begun by his predecessor, Ronald Reagan, and taped a New Year's Day greeting to the Soviet people. Soviet President Gorbachev again did the same for Americans. Both acknowledged the extraordinary changes 1989 brought to the East Bloc. Mr. Gorbachev said, quoting here, "The whole world is progressing, and we're deeply convinced the epoch of peace is possible." He added, though it won't come automatically.
The greater our hopes, the more we have to do together to make them come true. I propose that we make the 1990s a decade of greater closeness between the United States of America and the Soviet Union on the basis of universal human values and of a balance of interests.
Given the war-torn history of this century, we should redouble our efforts to forge a new century of peace and freedom. Our nations have produced Abraham Lincoln and Leo Tolstoy, Martin Luther King, Andrei Sakharov, and we persevered as allies in a terrible war. The challenges we face today are no less daunting, but with goodwill and determination on both sides, I am confident our two peoples will be equal to the task.
Mr. Bush was asleep in Houston when the clock struck 12, and he'll be back in the White House by bedtime tonight. In between, it's a few more hours of vacation with an extra reason to celebrate. Pam Olson has more on the Bush's blessed event and some not-so-blessed matters that remain unresolved.
The President and First Lady began the new year by getting up at dawn and heading for Alabama to go bass fishing. But first...
What's your New Year's resolution, Mr. President? Peace.
On Air Force One, the First Lady announced that their already large extended family has grown by one more. Son Marvin and his wife have adopted a baby boy.
Very exciting. Charles Walker Bush, of course.
That makes grandchild number 12. And how did the President and First Lady spend New Year's Eve?
We had Chinese dinner and candlelight, only because someone gave it to us. And we were the earliest people in bed in America.
President Bush ends his 6 days of hunting and fishing with the same problems he had before he left Washington. Topping the list is the still unresolved fate of Manuel Noriega. Noriega is still hiding in the Vatican embassy where he's been since Christmas Eve. Efforts to get the Vatican to hand him over continue. And after a New Year's Eve visit to American soldiers wounded in Panama, the president said he was more determined than ever to bring Noriega to justice.
We want him brought to justice. It's only fair and right for these kids lying here.
Other items waiting on Mr. Bush's desk when he returns to the White House include putting the final touches on budget proposals to be submitted to Congress this month, preparing for a drug summit in Colombia in February, developing strategies for dealing with a world remade by the collapse of communist regimes in Eastern Europe, and laying the groundwork for a summit meeting with Soviet President Gorbachev in June. But it is Panama and Noriega that will demand the president's most immediate attention. White House officials continue to deny that any deal is close at hand. The wheels of diplomacy, they say, continue to turn. Pam Olson, CNN, with the president, Montgomery, Alabama.
This New Year dawned bright and balmy in Pasadena to the relief of an estimated 1 million people on hand to watch the 101st Tournament of Roses parade. In addition to the requisite flowery floats, attractions included Zsa Zsa Gabor on horseback. She got booed, by the way. Ohio Senator John Glenn, the first astronaut to orbit the Earth, was Grand Marshal. Great moments in history was the theme of the Cotton Bowl parade today in Dallas. A smaller but equally enthusiastic crowd of 150,000 turned out for the prelude to today's game between Tennessee and Arkansas. Of course, the festivities are well into their 16th hour, having begun in earnest in New York's Times Square. 200,000 revelers noisily welcomed in the new decade as the traditional ball drop. In Atlanta, things got off to a peachy start, even though it happened about 9 seconds late. Elsewhere in the Georgia capital, the party got a bit out of hand. A few hundred people trashed the Marriott Marquis Hotel, throwing chairs, shooting fire extinguishers, and throwing plants. One worker said the place looked like World War III. In Los Angeles, it sounded a bit like a war zone. Throughout the city, well-armed residents used their guns as noisemakers despite repeated warnings from police that someone might get hurt. No one did. The Year of the Horse is underway in Japan, though many celebrants dressed as demons and dragons as part of the various religious rituals associated with the holiday. During the next 3 days, more than 30 million people are expected to turn out at places of worship. Many Romanians are contemplating a year of new prosperity and freedoms, but are marking the holiday in somber fashion. Candles burned through the night in Bucharest in memory of those who died during the recent revolution. There was no such restraint at all in Berlin, where residents from the East and West shared their first New Year together in nearly 30 years. The celebration centered in Brandenburg Gate, so recently a hated symbol of the city's division. Desmond Hamill was there.
A few celebrated high on the Brandenburg Gate itself, more crowded the top of the walls, but most were on the ground, with thousands streaming through the gap opened just before Christmas, and into this square, which has always been closely guarded and kept absolutely empty. But not anymore.
Right, just coming up to midnight now, the champagne's ready and this whole square around the Brandenburg Gate absolutely jam-packed with people.
There were tragedies, ambulances with great difficulty reaching some 135 revelers, one killed, the others injured, as a platform collapsed. But nothing could dampen the sheer exuberance that welcomed the 1990s as an explosion of colour and sound released the pent-up emotions of the past decade. This morning, rather more energetically, the crossing was still being used without formality as the annual West Berlin 6-kilometre run went for the first time into the east, through the Brandenburg Gate, and then, with much cheery hand-slapping, back across the border. Desmond Hamill in East and West Berlin.
No doubt about it, planet Earth took a beating in the 1980s, not just from oil spills, but from acid rain, global warming, mountains of garbage that will never decompose. It's a depressing list. David Goodnow now looks back, but also looks forward to what could be a cleaner and safer 1990s.
In the 1980s, mankind faced environmental problems that took hundreds of years to create. This is the result of modern technology, a hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica, first discovered in 1983.